we'll have to download both bits of film. So, one of the things we have to be aware of is this requirement for energy to put ATP and phosphocreatine back together, right, to re-establish the store. Because that means that if I'm an athlete that uses predominantly that system, I have to have either a very low intensity recovery or a complete rest recovery period in order to rebuild those two substances within the muscle cell, right? This becomes important when we start looking at intermittent type sports like basketball, a little bit of football, soccer-ish, although soccer has more of an aerobic component than a lot of team sports. Softball, baseball, right, where I'm running and stopping. Okay? So, the research indicates that if we work all out, maximum intensity, really, really hard muscle contractions, that our type 2 muscle fibers, which we haven't discussed the difference between type 1 and type 2 yet, but we will get there, right? But it's possible that our type 2 fibers under that situation, which doesn't happen very often, would run out of ATP and phosphocreatine around 4 seconds. So I can have considerably less than my 25-30 seconds under those circumstances, all right? So it's very tempting then to blame the running out, the depletion of ATP and phosphocreatine for fatigue in the muscle. And fatigue physiologically means that the force the muscle can create is decreasing. All right? It's not fatigue like, oh, I feel tired. Right? Physiological fatigue is measured by the decrease in force production by the muscle. However, the research indicates that it isn't to do with ATP or phosphocreatine, because when you run out of ATP, you don't see a decrease in force production. The decrease in force production, the timeline doesn't match the depletion of ATP and phosphocreatine. So what they think at the moment, and this is one of those instances where we just don't have enough information yet. We're still learning so much about this system, all right? But what they think is then that the fatigue that we see in the muscle used in system 1 is due to the increase in acidity, the decrease in pH. Because when we're breaking down ATP, we're releasing these hydrogen ions. Right? And so they think that this increase in acidity is one of the factors that leads to fatigue. There's also a discussion about, does it matter where the ATP is within the muscle cell? So this one is a little bit tricky to try to describe to you because we don't do enough motor learning, motor control on this degree plan. But when we turn on the muscle, we don't turn on the whole muscle at any one time, right? We turn on a percentage of muscle fibers within the muscle. And so the idea is maybe that the overall amount of ATP is usable, but it isn't in the particular muscle fiber that has just been turned on. That's going to take a lot more work to find out if that theory is correct, right? The other one that's relatively new is that now they're discovering that increases in inorganic phosphate appear to impact fatigue in this system. So again, the two things that we're releasing when we break down the ATP appear to be things that are affecting fatigue for this system. Right? When we do have depletion of these two, as I said, we have to have energy in order to put it back. Right? That energy usually is going to come from aerobic metabolism. All right? So I'm going to sprint as hard as I can, and then I'm either going to have to walk for a little ways, or I'm just going to have to stop and stretch out for a little bit, allow these two substrates to reform, and then I can sprint again. Okay? Question? All right. So, Austin's question, creatine supplementation. So given this picture, right, that there's some sense to the idea that if I took more creatine, maybe I would have more phosphocreatine available within the muscle cell, and I'd be able to go for longer than 25-30 seconds on this system, or I'd be able to go harder within my 25 seconds. Okay? The research is a little less supportive of the idea. One of the problems with taking creatine supplements is that they encourage water retention, and we know that water weighs quite a lot. Okay? So in the initial phase of taking creatine supplementation, athletes will put on anywhere from 3 to 6 pounds, but that's all water weight. So that's useless weight they've now got to move within the performance. Okay? The other problem with taking it orally is that it doesn't appear that very much of that supplement actually makes it into the muscle tissue. And there's some discussion over the creatine that does get into the muscle tissue. Is it then connected to phosphate and turned into phosphocreatine? Or is it just hanging around as creatine, in which case it's no use at all? Okay? So there's also some research that suggests that if you are in an event that uses this system, so a sprint, a throw, a jump, right, that it does help a little bit. So the research is really equivocal at the moment, very up and down. One of the things they do say is that if you have any history of kidney problems, you should not take creatine. Okay? So that's something to bear in mind. And that's interesting to me because when we talk more about protein, one of the problems of eating too much protein is it does kidney damage. And the athletes who are going to take too much protein are also the athletes who are likely to want to take creatine, and so now they might have a double whammy for their kidneys. So, all right. This rebuilding of the phosphocreatine and the ATP appears to improve with training. Right? So the capacity for resynthesis improves the more I train the system. But one of the nice things about training and adaptation is typically positive. It will occur to help you be better at the thing you are working at. Okay? So the potential then for the system to produce ATP, if we can have more enzymes available for the pathways, right, then that might improve ATP production. Okay? If we have more substrate available, if the creatine supplementation does the job, for example, then we would be able to produce more ATP within this system. Okay? when we look a bit more closely at that, again, the research is a little bit frustrating at the moment. So when we look specifically at the enzymes, so the ATPase and the creatine kinase, then the research shows that either we see no changes in activity of the enzymes, we see a decrease in activity, or we see an increase in activity. Not very helpful, really. However, the studies that show the increase in activity show quite a significant increase. So if those studies are getting to the root of the issue, that would be helpful, right? Studies that look at resistance training, studies that look at sprint cycling are showing this increase in ATPase and particularly creatine kinase with training. If we look at the substrate availability, then some studies show that ATP and PC concentrations do increase at rest for people who train that system. Some don't. Okay. Obviously, endurance training, I say obviously, because it's specific to the adaptation is specific to the training, right? So if I train aerobically, if I do endurance work and I'm not using this system would have no reason to adapt, right? So it's not going to change by doing long distance stuff. Okay. So the decision on whether or not increases in ATPC actually increase short-term performance in those kinds of events, again, is equivocal at the moment. Some studies say, yes, it does improve performance. Others say performance increases, but we don't see any change in ATP and PC availability. It's all over the place right now. Okay. We've got a lot to learn about this system. Question about System 1. I'm going to call it System 1 for a while. Okay, System 2. So we get to our 25, 30 seconds. We want to keep moving. We need something else to kick in to provide our ATP for muscle contraction. And we move predominantly to glycolysis, providing ATP for us. Right? So glycolysis is system number 2. When we get to system number 2, we've been working for long enough to have been able to break down some food molecules. Right? So we're going to break down carbohydrate. Remember I said earlier in the week that carbohydrate is a relatively small molecule, very easy to break down and get at the energy bonds. All right? So we haven't been working long enough yet to get at a great big fat molecule, but we can get at a small carbohydrate molecule by around 30 seconds. Okay? So we're going to start using our stored carbohydrate for glycolysis. Okay, so here's something I want you to think about. If biology people, Dr. Barlow makes you learn this, I'm really sorry for you, right? If you're not a biology person, I'm going to give you an easier version of this, okay? You don't need to learn every single step of the 10-step process for glycolysis if you're going to be a teacher, in my view. because I've learned it many times in my life and I couldn't tell you what they are if my life depended on it, right? So, much more simple version coming up. Okay, so we said that we had a 6-carbon molecule, carbohydrate, right? Now, one of the things you have to pay attention to with glycolysis is it depends which carbohydrate you are feeding into the system. So, if I am feeding in glucose from the bloodstream,